this report broke from the New York Times, essentially saying that the president was told that Putin did personally call for the hacking into our elections. Karl Rove is back with us. He's joined by Richard Goodstein, a Democratic strategist and policy expert. Saul Weisenberg is the former deputy independent counsel during Whitewater. Karl, I had to rudely interrupt you before we broke for commercial. What's your reaction to this New York Times report? It frankly doesn't really surprise me because Brennan was pretty much onto this Russia behind the meddling 6 months earlier, from what I could tell. So it doesn't really surprise me that the president would be briefed on this.
Yeah, look, no, it doesn't surprise me either. And frankly, remember early in the administration, I think the president had a line that I wish he had used on Monday, which is he said early in his term that, of course, he would like to know if anybody meddled in an American election, and because he would want to make certain that it was stopped. And I wish the president had that tone on Monday. But no, this latest report doesn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the ability of the Mueller investigation and our government's cyber forensics to be able to identify the specific actors, 12 actors sitting. Can you imagine those guys sitting in their office in the GRU and going online and seeing their names and asking the question of how could they tell it was us?
Yeah, and Saul, I want to ask you specifically about that indictment that dropped last Friday. One indictment, 12 Russian GRU and other officers. What of that? To me, I thought, why name them? Why not keep that under seal and actually try to see if maybe one of them comes to the United States? Apparently, some of them maybe have been to the United States. I mean, but what's the theory behind that?
Well, I don't know what the theory is, but if you don't put them under seal, you know you're never going to get them over
right,
here.
They're
GRU officers, and I think the point of the indictment, these people will never appear in the U.S. court. The point of the indictment was to buy Mueller some time and to say, look, I'm really doing things and I'm doing important things. But it's really a speaking indictment. And I don't doubt that he'll be able to, he'll prove that. It's just that he'll never be called on to prove it.
But indictment for our viewers, just to be clear again, an indictment are the charges. You do not yet see all the evidence. Obviously, they wouldn't put it all. A lot of it's very sensitive. But they're the charges against these individuals.
Absolutely. In
people
fact,
forget that. People think when you're indicted, like a lot of people are indicted, and they're not guilty. I mean, liberals used to believe that, but not saying they're not guilty. But yeah. People have to remember, if we're going to blame Trump for not having smart verbiage, we have to be smart with our verbiage too.
Laura, in every criminal case, state or federal, the judge tells the jury the indictment is not proof, the indictment is not evidence. And yet I saw on the other networks constantly, here we have the proof, here we have the evidence. Now, look, if Mueller didn't think he had it, he's perpetrated a massive fraud, and I don't think he has. But you know, Andy McCarthy made the comment that basically now all the Russians are presumed innocent because this has been put into an indictment. But the real point is this is a speaking indictment meant to buy time for Bob Mueller.
So no Americans named in it, no American actions referenced, but nevertheless it ate up some of the news cycle, and the president apparently, Richard, approved the timing, said it was okay to hand down the indictment. I guess they checked with the White House, and he basically said it was okay, which kind of kills the narrative that Trump was like worried about the indictments. But your reaction, Richard?
Can I react to this New York Times story? What's newsworthy about it is one of two things. Either Trump has no faith whatsoever in the intelligence community, because if he does, just today there's another New York Times story saying, well, I hold Putin responsible in the sense that he's the head of the country, just like people hold me responsible for what goes on here. No, if you were told 2 weeks before the indictment that Putin personally and directly was sort of overseeing this subversion of the U.S. democracy, that's not, oh, well, he runs the country. No, that's very specific, and Trump still can't acknowledge that. That's troublesome.
Well, that's what he said tonight on CBS News. That's what Donald Trump said tonight. That Putin is responsible. He's in charge of the country. Like I consider myself
but that's different. No, to say he's responsible because he's in charge of the country, it's like saying, oh, yeah, the manager's responsible for the team.
But this is where Karl Rove, I think, with your experience in the Bush administration, they're playing. I hate the multi-level chess reference, but he does have other concerns other than just what's happening in the Mueller investigation, what the New York Times is going to publish. He just had this meeting with Putin. Now, I imagine, and he referenced this today, Karl, they were talking about Israel, Iran, Syria, nuclear non-proliferation, getting back to some semblance of a whatever a normal relationship with Russia is. That does come into play, and Obama referenced this, Carl, back in 2016. He's like, insulting someone on the world stage, that doesn't accomplish anything. And I don't recall George W. Bush insulting Putin, whether in Crawford at the ranch or the Clintons when they were meeting, when Hillary was meeting with Lavrov. You don't insult people even if you know they're trying to mess around with our systems, which they always have been trying to mess around with our systems.
Yeah. Well, look, I agree with you. I don't take umbrage. President Trump should not have been there for the purpose of slamming President Putin to his face. Nor am I worried about having a solitary meeting. President Bush, for example, met on a one-on-one, literally drove the king of Saudi Arabia around his ranch in Crawford and discussed very important issues. I think that's overreach. I do think the president needed to project strength on Monday, and he didn't, by his words. It was when he was asked that question, he could have answered in a way that would have Putin would have known that he was upset about it and knew that the Russians were behind it, but it could have been straightforward and strong without being insulting. And the president didn't hit that note on Monday. He did a better job on CBS tonight. Even that tone would have been fine on Monday. But there's no need for the president to go in and insult world leaders just for the sake of insulting world leaders, particularly if you're trying to find a way forward. There are important things that we need to do. We've got serious questions about the Russians and living up to their existing treaty agreements on the intermediate range missile treaty. We have a treaty with them negotiated by President Bush that comes up for renewal in 2021 on nuclear weapons. We have concerns about them in that regard. I hope the president brought up they're not helping us in North Korea. Lavrov, as you remember, shows up 1 week before the meeting in Singapore. He shows up in Pyongyang to basically tell the North Koreans, we got your back,
don't worry.
stiff the Americans.
Yeah, не волнуйтесь in Russian. Не волнуйтесь. It's going to be okay. But I think the president should give an address to the nation about this. And Saul, Richard, Carl, where he talks about our relationship with Russia, basically what they discussed at this meeting, and what could be improved. No Mueller reference, no Peter Strzok reference, none of that. But give an address to the nation. A fantastic panel, guys. Thank you so much. I know it was short tonight with all this breaking news.